All right, welcome everybody to today's presentation in the Ohio Fish and Wildlife Presentation Series, brought to you by the Ohio Fish and Wildlife Management Association, the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative, and the Ohio chapter of the Wildlife Society. My name is Ken Duran, and I'm going to be moderating this presentation today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question box on your control panel on your screen. For those of you who are new to this webinar series, you can go and view all of our previously recorded webinars at the link on your screen. Also, at that link, we will be posting any updates for upcoming webinars. And there you can also sign up to receive emails automatically whenever we have a new webinar scheduled. Or you can just email me at my email is right there on the screen. Let's move on to today's presentation, though. The presentation is a success story in wildlife law enforcement throughout the U.S., being presented by Dirk Cochran. Dirk Cochran is currently the Law Enforcement Program Administrator for the Ohio Division of Wildlife. He has been in that position since November of 2013. For that position, he manages the law enforcement program, oversees pollution, the Violators Compact, which is the subject of today's talk, and wildlife restitution. Dirk began his career with the Division of Wildlife in 1996 as a wildlife officer assigned to Van Wert County. In 2002, he transferred to Morrow County as a wildlife officer and was promoted in 2012 to wildlife investigator in District 1 until he was promoted again in 2013 to his current position. Dirk grew up on a family farm in Muskingum County and graduated from Muskingum Area Technical College. So with that, Dirk, I'm going to hand this over to you. Thank you for presenting today.
Thank you for having me today, and I'm glad to be here with everyone, and I hope you enjoy the program that we put on this morning. So this morning, what I was going to talk with everybody about is the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. It's clearly a success story throughout the United States dealing with wildlife law enforcement. It's something that most people may not know much about, but after today's program, it should be in good shape. So we'll start with the compact and what it is. The compact is an agreement. There's currently 43 participating states, and you would think of it as similar to the driver's license violator compact or the non-resident violator compact for drivers. Those were related. Those compacts are related to the operation of motor vehicles. Our compact deals with wildlife violations. Our compact has two major components. The first component that it has is that if there's a non-resident from a member state who violates a wildlife law in any member state, they're treated like a resident. Been a great benefit for folks that maybe have minor violations that occur that our officers discover, because personal recognizance via summons is allowed or permitted instead of arrest, booking, and bonding. Again, all of the wildlife violations that occur in Ohio are misdemeanors of the 4th degree or higher. They all have the possible penalty. Sorry about that. They all have the possible penalty of at least 30 days in jail, and that would be up to the courts to impose. But through the compact, summonses can be issued for violators that are found, people that have been caught by our wildlife officers. And in most cases, they do not have to immediately go in for booking, just as we would do with a resident. In the future, if that person doesn't comply with the summons through the court, if they don't go to the court and take care of whatever process the court requires, then their hunting, fishing, and trapping rights are suspended in all compact states. It's a great way to ensure that those that are caught violating follow up with what they're supposed to do, and keep them from just violating in a member state and then leaving and saying, "Ha, you can't catch me." I'm going to continue to talk a little bit about what the compact is. The second part is it's a reciprocal recognition of license suspensions and revocations by member states. In other words, if you're in Ohio and you're arrested by a wildlife officer and you lose your hunting privileges, your trapping privileges, your fishing privileges, all member states will review that submission, and by agreement we recognize each other's suspensions. So suspended in one, suspended in all, in most cases. This program really helps us deter poaching. It gives us another tool to really, if you will, keep people, deter them, make the penalties a little tougher on people that travel across state lines or that take those opportunities to violate our laws. It also, really a great benefit is a central database that stores these violations nationwide. If a wildlife officer in Ohio is conducting an investigation on some people that are from another state that are a member of the compact, it gives us that line of communication as well as an access to a database where we can quickly find out if the person's ever been suspended in another state or if there are violations that have happened, and things makes the finding that information from a wildlife crime standpoint very easy. The other part of the agreement is the suspensions are only ratified if the violation is similar to an Ohio regulation. In this picture we see some Ohio wildlife officers that are working a state land protection project where we have some folks that are on motorcycles or ATVs that are encroaching on our properties and violating some regulations. This would result in summonses being issued, but it may or may not, based on the statutes, involve a license, a hunting license suspension. Some states that does, and some states it doesn't. Clearly, the first picture I showed with the poacher going out the window of the truck, hunting from the roadway, shooting from a motor vehicle, those are recognized as regular wildlife violations really throughout the country. But the situation with the off-roading may or may not involve that suspension. So each state makes that choice, and Ohio ratifies those that have similar to Ohio regulations. So we want to talk a little bit about how the Wildlife Violator Compact, how did it begin? The concept started, again, it was based on that idea of the driver's license compact that exists, where if you receive a violation for traffic law in one state, you're treated like a resident. And it really came out of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies back in the 1980s. In '85, there were draft compacts that were developed independently in Colorado and Nevada. Those drafts were merged into the basis of the compact. And in 1989, we have legislation passed in three western states that formed the nucleus of what became the compact in the future. And again, one of the founding principles of the Violator Compact is that the states each maintain that individual authority to suspend the privileges in their own states. That was one of the founding things. That just because you do something that may cause you to lose your privileges in Pennsylvania, each state can look at that independently as they want to apply those suspensions. So where did we go in Ohio? In the early 90s, or even before, wildlife officers really started recognizing the need for a compact. We started, it's been done for a long time, seeing poaching going on of some of our deer, some of our other wildlife resources, and now retired Executive Administrator of Law Enforcement Dan Snyder really advanced this idea. He was able to pick up that the compact was moving in the western states, and he began to advance the idea that this is something that we really need to look at in Ohio, another tool for our toolbox. My own personal story was back in 1999. I was working still in Van Wert County late one November night, and I was working with an adjoining wildlife officer out of Mercer County, and we apprehended a spotlighter that evening. He was caught red-handed, if you will, and him and his buddy both received their summonses and appeared in court and were fined and lost their privileges for either a year or two in Ohio. Again, being on the Indiana border, this guy just came back to us after court, and he says, "Hey," he said, "I have the ability to really go a lot of places. Does this suspension affect me anywhere else?" In 99, it didn't. "Nope, this is Ohio." He says, "I'll just go to Indiana to hunt. I'll go where I want to hunt. This doesn't bother me a bit." Clearly identified in my own personal career that, wow, that's something that I hope that so someday we can address that. During the decade of 2000, we saw just a tremendous amount of investigations conducted by our wildlife officers across the state, where groups were being caught and investigated for the taking of a large number of trophy white-tailed deer and turkeys and committing other violations that occurred. These cases just continue to bring to the forefront that the courts were handing out large suspensions of privileges to hunt, fish, or trap, restitutions or payments of fines, and forfeiture of equipment was given, and we see, sometimes even non-game or game without open seasons were taken. Equipment was forfeited, but these people just continue to be able to go outside of Ohio, even with the penalties that the court imposed, and continue to violate the law, or I shouldn't say that, continue to hunt, fish, or trap in other areas, kind of thumbing their nose at what the courts or what we had done here in Ohio. So those things just continued to be shown through the investigations that our officers were doing. We continue down the path. Again, we as officers and administrators clearly saw that the poaching of trophy deer and the investigations of non-residents coming to Ohio and poaching our wildlife resources. We continued to see those things, and we found that clearly demonstrated that Ohio's popularity as a destination for sport fishing and trophy deer hunting were leading people to come here from other states, and still having no real way to have someone that came here from another state, violated the law, would lose their privileges in Ohio, but they had no ramifications back when they went home. They could leave it behind. In 2007, all that began to really change in Ohio. We saw the introduction of House Bill 153 in the spring of 2007. The legislature was receptive to the idea of what the compact was. There have been some favorable rulings in some courts that it was a valid legislation, it was a valid agreement, and the process began to authorize the Division of Wildlife to enter into the compact. As we brought the process forward, we just saw an overwhelming support of the hunters, fishers, and trappers throughout Ohio that this would be a good piece of legislation and a good tool to have in our toolbox in wildlife law enforcement and wildlife management throughout the state to be able to continue to deter those that violate our laws. And the bill was passed through the legislature, and Governor Strickland signed the House Bill 153 in July of 2007. And it became law at that time. And Ohio joined the compact in January 2008. The process involved not only the legislation that went through the House and Senate was signed by the governor, but then a set of administrative rules had to be developed, and the process continued to move forward. But we joined on January 1 of 2008. Ohio's first submissions into the compact were made on June 16th of 2008. We had 7 Wisconsin men that were here, and you see a representative picture of some folks up on Lake Erie doing some fishing. But these guys were double tripping on Lake Erie walleye, going out multiple times a day, over bagging on the resource coming out of Lake Erie, and really weren't concerned about what would happen here. They were in Wisconsin. Some of them were even tournament fishermen that had entered into various fishing tournaments throughout the states. That some of those states were members of the compact. Well, upon their conviction and suspension, they quickly found that all of a sudden they couldn't go to these other states and fish anymore. Their privileges were suspended. It cost several of them to have to forfeit their entry monies into tournaments. The information quickly spread among the community that, well, if you go to Ohio, they're now a member of the compact, and if you get caught there, you lose your privileges. There could be ramifications no matter where you go, and that was just a real positive result right off the bat for us. So now we're going to look a little bit about where we've been in the compact and some ideas of some of the data that comes forward. This is a map of what the compact looked like in 2008 when we joined. All the red states were in. Yellow were in process. The blues hadn't came along yet, and the greens were also in process. And we see that the map was dominated by the western states. Again, that's where the compact originated. And we saw some of the eastern states start to move in, and that's the way it was in 2008. And then today we see a much different map. We've got 43 states that are members. We've got 5 more that are in the process of finishing their membership through rule processes. They've had legislation through. It's just some formalities of getting things finished up. And we have 2 states now that are only 2 left out of the compact. We hope to have, as we communicate with those states, the opportunity for the legislatures to make advanced legislation, to have them join, to have everyone throughout the country a member of the compact. But we can have a wide-reaching effect now with having the number of states either in or in the process of being in. And I hope that by the end of the year we'll see those 5 all be done and be in good shape. So now we're going to look a little bit about the growth in members and suspensions. It just represents the number of member states that we had. We see in 98 when the compact began, there were 4 states, and then that's continued to grow up through last year of 38 states and now up to 43. Correspondingly, we see the growth in the number of suspensions that are entered every year. In 98, there was a whopping 87 folks that had their privileges suspended, and it grew tremendously in a 3-year period. And as the number of member states continue to grow, we continue to see the number of suspensions grow every year. Each one of those suspensions has to be reviewed and ratified by each member state before they become effective in that state. Which at times can be time-consuming, but it's also a very important process that we go through to verify that, again, those violations that have occurred in other states are equal to something that would cause you to lose your privileges here in Ohio. If they're not, then the ratification is not made. It's a very important process that they have to go through. Now I want to show you some more data that I pulled out of our databases that we have. I looked into the license sales for the last 5 years and found that what states send us the most non-residents that buy either a hunting or fishing license together. So Pennsylvania, there are more residents of Pennsylvania that come to Ohio and buy a hunting or fishing license than any other state. And I guess the top 6 are listed out there from Pennsylvania down to Indiana. And then I started looking at how many suspensions do those states enter, regardless of residency. How many do they enter every year? So in 2009, we see that some states on that list, they didn't have anybody that they entered into the compact, or they weren't members yet. And we see that Kentucky and Illinois both had some people that entered that year, and we would have ratified those suspensions in that year. So and that's where we were at in 2009. In 2010, we see that Michigan came online, and we also see West Virginia showing up as bringing in, having those suspensions happen, and correspondingly Ohio ratifying those. And 11 pretty solid numbers, but again we now see Pennsylvania added, bringing another dynamic to the number of people that could have had their privileges to come to Ohio or to hunt, fish, and trap in Ohio removed. 2012 saw a big spike in Pennsylvania's activity, and we start to see Indiana showing up as having some suspensions. Again, 2013 continues to show standard or regular numbers in some of the states, and Pennsylvania's numbers continue to grow. That just gives you an idea that of the states where people come from to hunt or fish in Ohio, the impact that's had on their ability to go to those other states and pursue game. They could still come and do it illegally, but this is prohibiting them from buying the licenses, and also it gives our officers a tool to know who they might want to be looking for. So the next thing I thought I'd put together to demonstrate some interesting data was the top 5 states that suspend Ohio citizens. In other words, when Ohioans go somewhere else to hunt, fish, or trap.
Hey, Dirk, we have a question real quick.
Okay.
Going back to your previous slide, why do you think Kentucky has so few violations or suspensions?
I'm not sure. Sometimes different states have different sets of criteria for what they suspend privileges for. In some of the western states, really any violation that's handled by the Fish and Wildlife agencies will result in your suspension of your privileges. Some states have a very narrow or a very small number of acts that could result in your suspension. And I'm not also sure on really the number of licensed hunters or fishers in Kentucky, nor do I know there are a number of arrests per year. All those could be factors in the number of people that they would submit. I don't know the direct correlation there. I would tend to believe that it would be the result from the lack of a fewer number of violations that could result in suspensions.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So we're going to go back to this one with our top 5 states. Again, this is going to show us Ohioans go somewhere else. They've been issued that's in the compact, the state that's in the compact, and they've been issued a summons or citation, and as a result of that, they've lost their either hunting, fishing, or trapping privileges. It's kind of some interesting numbers. And this is since 2008. I just put this together. So, West Virginia. West Virginia has brought us, or more Ohioans have lost their privileges since 2008 from West Virginia than any other state. The next is Colorado. which was quite surprising to some folks until we start talking about, okay, where do Ohioans go and what do they do when they go there for hunting and fishing? And clearly Colorado would be a western destination state for big game that we may not have here, or don't have here. And also the western states have, they have a very strict, what's called a wanton waste law, dealing with almost all of their game animals. That if you, for example, if you shoot a bear, you have to take all of the edible meat. If you skin that animal out and only take the trophy, if you will, and don't take the edible portion, and they discover, then they make that case, it's very, very stiff penalties to include the license suspensions. The next one's going to be South Dakota, and I think those that would be upland bird hunters would understand the draw of going to the Dakotas for some of our either waterfowl or game bird hunters, and we see those suspensions that have happened to our residents that have went out there. Montana comes in next, again showing that western state influence of big game hunting and possibly some situations with that. And the last of the top 5 was Pennsylvania. Again, a next door state like West Virginia. A lot of historical visiting from Ohio residents into those 2 neighbor states, which has given rise to the opportunity for some of our people to find visitation from the game wardens. So let's do a comparison the other way. Let's see who we suspend. In other words, what state sends residents here where our wildlife officers discover violations and the courts suspend their privileges. Number 1, Indiana. A neighboring destination state. I think you're going to see a pattern develop here, though, that may identify where that's from. The next is Wisconsin. So why do Wisconsin people and Indiana people come to Ohio and Illinois? Pattern developing of folks that come here to enjoy the Lake Erie resource and our sport fish resource. The vast majority of these are related to violations of the sport fish regulations, overbagging on walleyes, double tripping, various walleye regulations that happen, and those suspensions have been moved into the compact from those states, and that's clearly why we see those numbers where we're at. North Carolina is a state that does send us quite a few folks that hunt and fish, a lot of hunters, and we see the majority of these suspensions dealing with hunting violations coming up here for trophy deer. And deer and other violations are represented from the first 3 states as well. And then the last is West Virginia, again, a neighboring state. Various reasons to come up to hunt, fish, trap in Ohio, and we see the suspensions that happen. So just kind of a snapshot to say, yeah, this is where we go and where people come here. And it kind of brings me to the adage of some of the commercials of, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, with the violator compact, what happens where you go, it goes home with you. And from a law enforcement standpoint, again, a real valuable tool that we can use, because the number one question that, and I shouldn't say number one, but one of the highest questions we get as law enforcement officers once we make contact with someone and we're in the process of issuing a summons or working through violations that have happened, am I going to lose my hunting privileges? Am I going to lose my fishing privileges for this violation? That's the question that the sportsmen and women ask, and that's a concern they have. They understand that that's a possibility when there's a violation. So the next thing we want to look at is just kind of some trends in Ohio and give you some representative numbers. The blue bars are the number of arrests that our wildlife officers make throughout the state, regardless of violation type, every year, back to 2009. And we're going to get into the process of how the suspensions work, but here in a few slides. But right now we're just looking at how many suspensions have been entered into the compact from Ohio in each one of those years. And you can see that even though our arrest numbers have dipped a little bit in the last 3 years, our suspension numbers have actually increased, which shows us that some of the violations that are being discovered are maybe more egregious, or the courts are taking them seriously, and the suspensions that are being handed out are getting processed through and entered into the compact. I'm going to take a quick peek at 2014. The first set is as of August 1st. So far this year, I've entered 98 people into the compact for ratification by all the other states, and so far we've had 3,644 arrests throughout the state of completed summonses. There could be more than that. This is a number of only tallies that only gets recorded when those arrests are completed and through court. So we can see where we're at. If we kind of project that out for 2014, we can see that we're at 190, and projected 190 entries and 7,500 arrests for 2014. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The total bars are not for Ohio arrests. They are for entries in the compact. I'm sorry, I misspoke on that. The red bar is how many entries we currently have across all the compact states at 3,600. We're projecting 7,500 entries into the compact. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the compact works. So there's a violation that's discovered in the field. The summons is issued by a wildlife officer. The poacher is brought through the court process and found guilty. Courts, as part of the sentencing process, can suspend hunting, fishing, and trapping privileges as part of their sentencing. Also, the wildlife chief can suspend hunting, fishing, trapping privileges under certain circumstances in Ohio law. Our wildlife officers then complete a suspension notification form and submit that through their supervisor, which makes its way up to me here at central office. Once I receive that, I enter the person into the violator compact database and send them a notice of suspension. This is their official notice that they've been suspended in Ohio, and as well as all the members of the compact. The compact and the Wild Ohio Customer Records Management System, or WOCMS, they sync once a week or more if we needed to do it, to manually do it. And those records compare each other, and they talk back and forth, knowing who was suspended. The suspensions that happen in WOCMS that are recorded there, revocations, are actually imported through the violator compact. The Division of Wildlife maintains our arrest and suspension records in WOCMS, and the officers have access to that for arrest data and suspensions for historical reasons or doing investigations. And some of the benefits to the sportsmen of the compact: it keeps poachers from obtaining licenses. It's a deterrent in that way. It gives a consistency across jurisdictions. So our states all try to work together in these matters, as well as the courts that exist throughout the state. We can explain the violator compact to the courts and the judges, prosecutors, and they have an understanding of how it works. And again, in many cases involving violations of wildlife law, they won't have to post bond. It's something they can take care of through the court system without an initial having to go right then. Excuse me. Benefits for wildlife law enforcement is great time savings and being able to have shared information, access in our vehicles, as you see over Officer Shield's shoulder, to our mobile data terminals in our vehicles, having access to that information on a timely fashion. It streamlines the violation process from suspensions. We enter them into a compact. It talks to WOCMS. Those things go back and forth very seamlessly. And it greatly reduces the number of failed to appear cases. Again, you would issue a summons to a non-resident, and they either wouldn't appear, or or wouldn't take care of what was in court, I'm never coming back to Ohio. I don't care. Now they have a reason that really having an impact on them. Managing all the data that we have, and just to show you, since '98, there's been over 50,600 people suspended by a member state, either hunting, fishing, and trapping. Again, their privileges have been suspended. That doesn't mean they're still suspended today. Most suspensions run 1 to 3 years, but there are many times that folks will receive lifetime suspensions for really egregious violations. Ohio has suspended 859 people since 2008, both residents and non-residents. And 837 Ohio citizens have been suspended since 2008. Again, that's who we've suspended as well as other states. So kind of wrapping this thing up, I want to kind of go back to our initial, one of our early slides. I talked about a story of catching that spotlighter, and things continually cycle in wildlife law enforcement. And as a wildlife officer, we gather this data, and we watch poachers, and we work people, and we know, and we gather information, and we really we want to catch those guys that are violating our laws and abusing our wildlife resources. And this same fella that we caught in '99, he was caught again in '09. And this time he was convicted of 9 poaching violations, mostly all involving deer. Several other violations, there were summons issued, but flat out and different things. And he didn't learn his lesson that first time. Well, this time he lost his hunting privileges through the spring of 2014, and he lost them in all compact member states. A little different go around. And now what he did here goes with him anywhere that we have in a compact member state. Time will tell if he learned his lesson this time, because he didn't last time. We hope that this does it, and we know that the compact is a great tool to identify these people that continually violate our laws, violate our wildlife resource, abuse what has been provided for us, and this is just another opportunity for us to be able to ensure and work through the courts that the poachers that decide to do these things pay the penalties that are appropriate for what they've done. Any questions? That's what I have. Would you like to talk about anything?
Thanks, Dirk. That was very informative. It's great to hear how successful that's been. If anybody has questions, please just type them in onto the dashboard, and then I will read them off to Dirk. I did have one question for you. If somebody had their suspension or their license suspended before we signed the compact, were those still suspended across the rest of the states after signing the compact?
No. The way the legislation was written, as well as the rules, the administrative rules we have, and the rules of the compact, any violation that was adjudicated was finished or happened before we entered the compact, those suspensions do not carry forward. So a couple of the pictures that I showed you, those large poaching cases, some of those people who were convicted in those cases lost their privileges for an extended period of time. Some of them were under lifetime suspension. But those happened before the compact, and those people can still go out of state and legally purchase licenses and hunt. So anything that happened before wasn't able to be brought forward. The other thing that I didn't mention in this is that we have a restitution law in Ohio as well, where folks that are convicted of illegally taking our wildlife resources can be ordered either through the court or through chief's order for restitution to pay back the value of those animals as prescribed through Ohio law. Through that process, we suspend their privileges until they make payment of that restitution to the Division of Wildlife. That type of of suspension is not eligible for the compact. The compact would look at that type of suspension as a bill collection because the restitution owed in. It's not a violation type suspension. So those people aren't entered into the compact. They are suspended in Ohio, but they aren't entered in.
We have another question is, what do you think is preventing some of those other states from signing on, those two remaining?
I'm not quite sure. Having just come into this position in November and working through this process, here in about 3 weeks I'll be at my first national conference where we'll have all of the agencies represented from across the country, and we'll have a couple subcommittee meetings of the Violator Compact, and through that I'm sure I'll learn what the hurdles are for the 2 states that haven't joined yet, but I don't know specifically what those are. I know historically one of the big things, the big hurdles that was there, and I mentioned it a couple times in my discussion, was that the states maintain that autonomy, that individuality of having that choice of whether to suspend or not. That was a very big concern of many states, like, and even in Ohio. The testimony happened from the Wildlife Agency at the time when the legislation was going through. That was some of the things that the committees that looked at our law were concerned about and reassured that those individual states, Ohio would still have that ability. So that could be some leftover concerns, but I don't know the specifics.
If somebody from Ohio bought a license and then went to another state and had his license suspended, is his license suspended immediately, or is it the next? Do you allow them to continue hunting for that year?
They're suspended as soon as the notification is put into the compact.
Okay.
So there is a little bit of a lag time between the occurrence of the violation and then the processing through the court, and then the submission of the form, and then the entry into the compact. It is still at times a cumbersome process, but it's what we have to work through at this time. But the court suspension takes effect on the day that the judge orders it. So if the judge orders the suspension to begin today, the suspension begins today. Then if it takes, when I ratify it, that suspension or enter that suspension, it's going to the date that I put in is the date the court orders it. So
okay.
That's the functional date.
Well, do we have any more questions?
Just a little side note. This spring, again, we had some people from Wisconsin that were here and were caught with some walleye violations, and they did have to appear before the judge and lost their privileges. And immediately when they got home, this was like on a weekend when they got caught in Ohio, they had to appear in court on Monday. On Tuesday, they were calling Wisconsin to find out when their suspension would begin in Wisconsin, because they knew that they weren't going to be able to fish in there as well.
All right, well, I think that's all the questions. Thank you again, Dirk. That was very informative, and again, it's great to hear the success of this and helping you guys fight violations for wildlife laws.
Again, thanks for everybody for listening today, and if anytime anybody has questions, you can get a hold of me here at Central Office or through an email process.
All right. Thank you. Bye.